Welcome back to another episode of Trends Talk. I'm Sarah Sladek, your host. I'm the CEO of XYZ University. And every month we talk trends with some really notable leaders because let's face it, there's a lot of change happening. And if we want to stay future focused and engage future generations, we have to pay attention to those trends as well. That helps to position our organizations at a competitive advantage. So we talk trends on the last Thursday of every single month year round. And today I'm really excited to be joined by LaToya Tapscott, who is at the head of a global think tank for a prominent association. I'm going to bring her on in just a moment. We go through, if you're new to Trends Talk, we will go through 5 questions, but you, dear audience, are encouraged to also submit questions. We usually have audience members tuning in from all over the country and sometimes even globe. So please send your questions. We'll do our best to accommodate them. We have 30 minutes. Let's get ready and go. LaToya, join me, please. And if you would, please just share a little intro.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. Such a pleasure to be here with you today. So I'm LaToya Tapscott. I am the Senior Director and Global Head of the HBA Think Tank at Healthcare Businesswomen's Association. And so I've been in this role for a little less than a year, but have been in the association space for over 16 years. And really excited to be here today. I'm a fan of Sarah. I actually have been following you, Sarah, since you were doing your focused work on millennials and engaging them as members in associations. I went to one of your workshops in DC and then participated in your online course, that's a self-paced course that you had as well.
Yes,
so
yes.
Been following you since then.
And now the millennials are, not young anymore. Well, still little, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, we're not young anymore. You're right.
All right. Yes. So millennials like you are in prominent roles of influence and leading organizations. I'm so excited to have you here today. We have a lot to talk about. So let's get started. Round 1. Woo-hoo. All right. What current stat or data point best summarizes the need for organizations to prioritize the advancement of women in the workplace?
Yes, absolutely. And so at Healthcare's Business Women's Association, we of course do a lot of work around this. And before I get into one of the striking stats that I'll share, I'll just share that, we say that, women are at the table, but really they're still being asked to bring their own folding chairs to the table. And the data really continues to show that. Leadership doesn't yet truly reflect the workforce. And so one of the things that we do at the think tank is we use data as a mirror and a map. So we use it to not only reflect the hard truths, but also to help guide us forward into action. And so one stat that it probably will come as not much of a surprise to many, but always strikes me is that, women make up nearly 50% of the workforce, yet only about 10% of Fortune 500 CEOs are women. And so as of right now, 2025, 52 women are a part of the Fortune 500 CEOs, and that's a record high. So it tells you while there is progress, it's really, really, really slow because this work has been done for some time. And with that stat, even fewer are women of color specifically. But then when we look at healthcare specifically, in healthcare, women represent over 75% of the workforce. So they are the majority of the healthcare workforce, but only hold approximately 20% of executive roles. So really a huge and glaring leadership gap there.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I was listening to a podcast recently and they talked about how Generation X is really the kind of the first generation to be really prominently have women in the workplace. Even during the baby boomer era, a lot of women left the workforce to raise families. There was still kind of that traditional model of family life, and Gen X is the first to hold more jobs. But you think about that, like we're talking really recent history where gender roles have changed, and yes, absolutely needing to see more women in the workplace, but still dealing with some issues where women weren't necessarily encouraged at young ages. We still have some of that situation with, Gen X, baby boomers. Women weren't really encouraged to think about executive roles or,
Absolutely. Absolutely. I just
so
had a conversation with someone the other day and they wanted to go into healthcare. And, previously you were told that you could just be a nurse, right? That was all you could
mm,
be in healthcare, even when you wanted to enter the workforce. And so it's
yeah,
funny you mentioned Gen X, they're really that sandwich generation right now. So while they're, more represented in the workforce, they're also juggling huge caregiving responsibilities, upward with their parents living longer as well as downward with their children. So much stress and burnout for that generation as they do hold these leadership roles at the same time.
right. It is an era of change, which is, again, harkens back to your work and what you're doing and why it's so incredibly important. Let's go to round two. Okay. So here and now, I mean, let's just talk about the elephant in the room, right? Here and now, we're talking about DEI, and that affects women, that affects race, that affects religion, it affects age, and the work that we do here at XYZ University, all the things. And here and now, DEI programs are being backburnered, they're being eliminated. And let's just hash that out a little bit. If this trend continues, in your opinion, LaToya, how's that likely to impact the future of business?
Yes, Sarah, such a
That's a
huge
big
question.
question.
Yeah, a huge question. So I like to start, before I even respond, because, DEI really has become a buzzword lately.
Mm,
I really want to pause for a moment on the acronym DEI, which stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. I do think it's so important to say the full words out loud, because I do think that when we shorten it to just an acronym, we truly risk losing, the real meaning behind it, which is
yeah.
the diversity of people, the equity of opportunity, and the inclusion of all voices being heard. So I think these aren't just buzzwords, right? They are values that shape the strength, sustainability, the humanity of organizations. And so when we forget what DEI actually stands for, I think we forget why it matters and why that work matters so much. And so even when we look at the acronym DEI, it wasn't always in the headlines. I think people were doing this work, building bridges, advocating for better. I mean, this work has been happening for some time. Some of the biggest advancements that we've had in that space, in the workplace, in fairness, that happened when no one was clapping for it, no one was paying attention to it. And so I try to remain really optimistic that, no matter what you call it, I think the work is bigger than the acronym or the initiative in itself. And so, to answer your question, when companies retreat from the acronym DEI, they aren't just pausing progress. They're really setting themselves up for a talent drain and missed innovation and really, risking their reputation as a credible organization. Typically when I sit down with business leaders today, I don't start the conversation with, why does DEI matter? I typically started with, what happens to companies that ignore the realities of a changing workforce? And I think that's really the honest piece of it that we're not talking about as much, because talent itself is diverse. Markets are diverse. I work in healthcare specifically. Healthcare outcomes are diverse. And the inclusion of everyone isn't really about charity. It's just about doing business and smart business as that. We're in a talent economy right now. So it's an economy that's based on, being super collaborative, technology driven, rapid cycle changes in the way we're doing business. So what this means for our business leaders and our HR leaders, it means that they have to challenge their core assumptions about how people enter the workforce, how they work together, how they develop their potential. So essentially, how do you retain those employees? Not just about getting them, but retaining them as well. And so, women and historically excluded groups, they're currently watching companies and companies where they stand. And loyalty, I think, can't be assumed, especially as we look at the younger generations. We talked about millennials, but also Gen Z as they enter the workforce. It's not enough really to say the right thing. You really have to build workplaces that genuinely nurture the advancement and leadership at all levels, not just at senior levels. And I think that the most resilient organizations will be the ones that really hold the line on inclusion, even when it gets really, really hard. And I think if organizations step back now, they'll find themselves really fighting for talent, for trust, and for innovation later. But the companies that double down on building these types of environments where everyone can advance, especially women and historically excluded groups, I think those will be the ones that will really shape the next generation of industry leadership for us.
I agree wholeheartedly. And you just said a whole lot of things that were really important. I want to backtrack for just a second. I think it's really fascinating, upsetting, worth exploring, just kind of looking at how society has shifted within an approximate 5-year time span. We're coming up on the 5-year anniversary of the George Floyd murder. And DEI started being talked about so much, and there was new jobs that emerged out of this, and there were corporate funding and new programs, and it became a huge emphasis. And now, fast forward, and all of a sudden, we have some of the companies that jumped on that bandwagon, or all of a sudden, bam, without a second thought, they're off. And that's really, I love that you said that this work really matters to young people, because all of the research shows that it does. And I think young people are really disillusioned and will boycott certain companies that don't uphold these values. And but it's always interesting to me to look at the psychology and sociology of things, like what and you hate to think that it's profitability. Well, as companies, we're just choosing to go where the masses are going, to try to follow the almighty dollar. And I would like to think that if we projected 5 years into the future from now, that we will be in a very different place than where we're at right now. But I'm just kind of have a lot of random thoughts about that, but curious to hear your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, as you mentioned, companies were really hopping on when it was the popular thing to do. And now that it has become, unpopular, or attacked in a sense, then it's been very easy for some companies to quickly turn their backs on it or say they're no longer doing it. And I think that for companies where it was truly embedded into their culture, their mission, it's not that easy for them to just turn it off with a flip of a switch one day. And so if someone can just walk away from it that easily, I think that begs a different problem from the beginning, right? It's kind of the motives behind having those types of initiatives, or just a department that you can shut down one day, right? It was never truly embedded into what you do. It was never truly genuine, I think, to begin with. And so again, people are paying attention to the companies that waver, people that are paying attention to companies that straddle the line, I think, or go back and forth. I mean, we use classic example when we just look at today and what's happened in the last few months. And you look at, Target being one of the, earlier companies that came out and said they were kind of shutting down their DEI initiatives and programs, and the huge backlash that they received, versus another company, a Costco, that came out really early and said they were standing firm on it. And then just look at even how that has affected both of those companies' profits. So we hate to think it is just about profitability, but at the end of the day, that seems to be what it is. But I think when you think about your workforce and your need to stay relevant, competitive in a quickly evolving market, if it truly is about profitability, which in most cases it is, then you will figure out how to continue the work and continue to embed this in your organization, regardless of what language you use around it.
Yes. Well, and it's interesting to weave in that women's piece, because women do have huge purchasing power.
Absolutely.
And so, yes, Target, if you're watching, you absolutely broke my heart. And I have pulled back the purse strings, and I was a big spender with Target. So, Target, you're feeling
Same,
it.
Sarah.
You're feeling
Same.
it. All right. I see we have a question in the Q&A, but I want to get to round 3, and then we'll start taking some questions from the audience. All right. How do you lead large-scale change initiatives? Now, I'm asking you this, LaToya, because you are in a very prominent role for a very prominent organization, leading a global think tank. And right now, there's a lot of change going on, and I'm just curious, how are you doing it? What's the secret to your success?
Yeah, great question, Sarah. So, I never really set out to lead a think tank. I really just set out to kind of change the conversations that we were having
I like that.
around things that matter and things that are really important to me, women and the advancement of them, being one of them. And so I think, for me, I lead change the way that I build trust, which is by listening first.
Yeah.
I think real change is about co-creating a vision people can see themselves in. And so large scale change, I think it only sticks when you lead with 3 things, and that's data, dialogue, and dignity. And so much of that also we do in our HBA Think Tank Solution Summit. So I'll speak a little bit more to that. But I think we use the data to understand the truth, the dialogue to actually co-create what the path forward looks like, and the dignity to ensure that every voice feels seen and valued throughout the process. And so that's really the model we use for HBA Think Tank, especially specifically with our solution summits that we have once a quarter. We gather insights through surveys, research, feedback. Then we bring stakeholders together to have the dialogue around it as we look at the data. And then we center the human impact, not just the business case, and really work to co-create. And so we focus on meeting people where they are by using the data to tell the story, and the dialogue to create the ownership over it. And so large scale change, I don't believe always happens from the top down. I think it happens when everyone feels responsible for building something better. And I always like to say that, transformation is personal before it's organizational. I don't think people resist change as much as they resist being changed without being consulted. And so throughout my career and beyond, I try to really lead by listening first, aligning vision second, and then only once those things are done can you move forward into action. That's my belief.
Oh my gosh, so many great little nuggets and quotes. I love it. And yes, you're absolutely right. I think real change happens when it's a grassroots movement. I think we've moved
Absolutely.
into that era, right? I mean, we've always maybe been in a grassroots where grassroots has been very compelling and important, but we're finding, I think now even more so, because people have access to social media and they can use their voices and really rally for change in some very significant ways.
Mm-hmm.
And young people want to be the voice for change as well. So that collective is so much more powerful than one person
Absolutely.
saying, I'm demanding change of you, or at least that's our hope as we go forward into this kind of new unknown, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. I see we have a question from the audience. I'm curious if you think that the current diminishing of DEI is in some ways elevating the issue and strengthening our voices to push forward, even though we've recently lost ground. And so that kind of gets back to that grassroots piece. But do you think DEI is actually elevating the call for DEI?
I do actually. I'm a firm believer that everything happens for a reason. I think there is a reason we are going through this phase right now. And I will call it a phase intentionally. I do. I think it kind of goes with what I mentioned earlier when I said, after 2020, when companies came out and they just, started a project or an initiative or opened up a new department. I think that there were some challenges in that setup to begin with it not being truly embedded throughout everything that the organization does and all of their practices. So I think there's some opportunity here to elevate the work, revamp what it looks like, and make it more meaningful and impactful across the board, honestly.
Yeah. I agree. And I think sometimes when you try to, silence or minimize things, it actually amplifies them. and
Absolutely.
I and what is that saying? You don't know what you've got till it's gone. So now
Mhm.
that things are being stripped away, people are saying, "Oh, wait a second,
Yep.
this is
And
really important."
and a lot of people may not ever come to this reality, but a lot of people didn't really understand what DEI meant,
Yeah.
and all of the things it impacts, right? When you try to remove it. There are many people that are finding out now exactly the extent of DEI programs and initiatives and how much impact they have had across the board, not just for one race, demographic, or gender. And so I think we're educating a lot of people right now as well, as it relates to the work that has always been done and will continue to be done.
Mm-hmm. I see another question just popped in, which I'll go ahead and ask. Do you think companies can avoid the pressure of some political pressures to stay the course in DEI practices if they are strong enough to do so? So, do you think companies can avoid some of these political pressures and stay the course, still doing DEI? Will they be strong enough to do so? That's a tough question. What do you think? It looks like LaToya froze, at least on my end. Woo-hoo. I think that's an excellent question. I don't have all the answers. I'm going to try to fill time since we're live. And hopefully LaToya is going to pop back in. It looks like she's shutting down and popping back in.
Can you hear me, Sarah?
I can. Whew,
Okay.
I'm so glad you're back because I was like, I don't know the answer to that.
So sorry. I wasn't sure if it was on my end or yours. Sorry about that.
No problem.
You were just about to ask another question from the audience.
Yes, I did. So here's the question. Do you think companies can avoid the pressure of the political pressures and stay the course, keep doing DEI? Are they going to be strong enough to do so? What do you think?
I think that is a really hard question right now. I think that there is a way. I think, I was just telling Sarah before we went live, there are a lot of companies having strategy meetings right now. They're in meetings with their general counsel, their lawyers, really examining, fine tooth and nail these executive orders and how they can continue to operate and do work that may not, have negative implications as far as their government funding, etc. I will say they've made it really hard right now. And so I think we're in strategy mode. So I think there's still a lot to come from that. In our industry for HBA, many of our corporate partners are in the pharmaceutical or life sciences space. And so we have, it really runs the gamut. I mean, we have companies that have immediately said, we're doubling down, we're not. But I also think we've seen it varies depending on where some of their funding is coming from,
Right.
and what they can or can't do. So I think a lot of organizations are strategizing, planning, maybe just briefly in a retreat mode as they figure out the next steps forward. So I don't know if that answered the question. It's kind of hard right now, as we are as well at HBA. So.
Right. It is hard. And I will just add, we have a client that's a university, and, kind of the flip side of this, they were saying they've spent thousands, tons and tons of hours trying to, fight this, and also, trying to revise some things and and it's an incredibly time consuming task. So taking that into consideration as well. I mean, yes, fight the fight, but it's going to take real effort, right? Real effort, real time, real bandwidth.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go
Absolutely.
to our next question. All right, here we go. Oh gosh, and we only have 5 minutes left, so we'll do these real quick. All right, so round 4, what are 3 steps organizations can take to prioritize environments where all employees can advance and succeed? 3 steps.
Yes, I'll go through these quickly. I want to elaborate too much, but I think first would be audit your data. I think if you don't know really where you're starting, then you're kind of operating blind. And when I say audit your data, that's your culture, your advancement pathways. Before you can really start, you have to really know the truth about where you are today. I would say second is invest in leadership development early. Don't just wait until someone is quote unquote ready. I think it's important to make leadership pathways visible and accessible to all. Really start identifying and cultivating leaders earlier in the pipeline, making sure that leadership pathways are visible, accessible, and you're transparent about them as well. So creating KPIs, et cetera, because when you don't, there's always opportunity for bias to seep in. And then one thing I'll say on that is also rethink what readiness looks like when you think about career advancement and pathways, specifically when it comes to younger generations as they enter the workforce. I think moving beyond these rigid requirements will be extremely important to keep them engaged and retain them. And then lastly, I would say normalize sponsorship, not just mentorship, sponsorship. And so, in other words, the sponsor opens the door to opportunities for another employee, while a mentor just supports and guides them as they open the door for themselves. There's a big difference. And so I think it's really important. I once had a sponsor, a leader who was a sponsor, and she made sure that rooms were set up so that people like me could walk into them without hesitation. And I think that's the power of an environment that lets people advance.
All right, fantastic. All right, so we have 2 questions. Can we do it in 3 minutes? Can we do hot seat? Can we go super fast? And oh, and it looks like we lost LaToya again. I wonder, there you are. Is it me on my end? Let's.
So sorry, Sarah, can you hear me?
I think Sarah's going to have to log back in quickly.
Oh, okay.
She's coming back now.
Okay.
Having all kinds of technical fun today.
It's okay. It's okay.
I'm so sorry. So I know we had a question come in. I wanted to try to get, okay, so 2 questions super fast. Can we do it?
Sure.
All right. First one is, are there new and additional ways people can get involved and renew the DEI conversation?
I think working collectively is really great. We are all challenged in this area right now and strategizing and brainstorming on how to proceed and what the next steps are. I think companies and associations not trying to go at it alone. So find those collaborative groups that are talking about this, find those networks that can support you and or your organization throughout this as well. And I think that's where the real change will happen. That power of community, I think, will be super important as we move forward in this space.
Fantastic. You did good. You did good. All right. One more question. Such an important question. Our last one. What trends are you currently watching and advising others to prepare for? Because this is Trends Talk after all. So curious to hear.
Sure. So I would say top trends. I would be remiss if I said nothing about AI. I think the intersection of AI and bias is what I'm looking at. So how automation could accelerate or correct inequities as it relates to that. And so AI could either entrench biases further or be leveraged to dismantle them, I think. And so paying close attention to that. The other, I think, would be the backlash to DEI. I think we talked about this earlier, how companies can stay authentic and not reactive in this current time. So, the work to build inclusive workplaces didn't start with a budget line, and I don't believe it will end just because a budget line gets cut or disappears. And so I think this moment is really a test of values. So watching the evolution of these programs go from initiatives to truly being built into the infrastructure, as I mentioned earlier. And then the last, and you actually mentioned it earlier, Sarah, and that's the rise of women's financial influence. I think as household decision makers, women are currently driving 70 to 80% of consumer purchasing decisions. And if you aren't advancing women, I think you're not just limiting careers, you're limiting your market, your innovation, and your future. And so watching how women's financial and leadership power continues to grow, not quietly, but forcefully, and how that will shape industries, specifically healthcare, but industries overall, is what I'm paying close attention to.
Oh, fantastic. Well, we did it, LaToya, and you were an amazing guest. And I've got to have you back because everything you said, I was like, oh, I have 20 more questions. And I know our audience had lots of questions too. So thanks everyone for tuning in to Trends Talk. We will be back again next month. And I'm really excited to announce that XYZ University is just announcing we are going to be hosting a summit in October called the Next Gen Now Summit. So go to our website to learn more information and also watch for a survey to pop in. We appreciate you following our fabulous show, and special thanks to LaToya Tapscott for being our guest today. See you next month. Yes, thank you.
Hi, everybody.